What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Greedfall: The Dying World, or Greedfall 2. Follow-up to Spider's, I believe, best-selling game of Greedfall up until this point. Now, this video is going up more than likely on the day the game itself releases, and that is possible because I was given access to the review version ahead of time from the developer and publisher, of course. However, probably worth a mention at the same time that this game had been in early access for quite some time, since 2024 actually, and I bought the game when it released into early access. So what they gave me access to was the review branch over on Steam. I had already owned the game. And just to go ahead and get it out of the way, as you probably have heard the news, Greedfall 2's publisher, Nacon, who owns the developer, Spiders, is moving through an insolvency case. Basically, they didn't have the money to pay their bills, and so that does make the future of Greedfall 2 a little uncertain. It was too late with that happening for the game not to release. That was pretty much locked in already. And while Spiders has said they do have some post-launch support planned, how much post-launch support this game gets and how much it needs is certainly going to be up for debate a little bit. However, those factors aside, let's talk about the game itself, because first impressions-wise, I am happy to report that at least the first couple of opening hours play much better than I was expecting. So throughout the game's early access period, it did kind of feel like they were developing relatively slowly because the final early access patch was patch 0.3, and now they're jumping, of course, to the 1.0 release. And while there are plenty of times that what you see in early access doesn't always get updated super regularly, and then the release happens and it's much different or much improved, etc. So happy to report that at least in this case, that does seem to be the case. The 1.0 version looks a lot better just straight away. You can tell they really did a lot of work with the lighting and stuff in comparison to what has been in the early access availability. The other side of that is the final sort of balance pass to the combat that is going into place for 1.0 has also been, I would say, very welcome. So Greedfall 2 makes a big change from the first game's more action-oriented combat to a more tactical system here in the second game, which, as with any change, isn't going to be everybody's cup of tea, but having recently played Greedfall to get ready for this one, I gotta say that combat system did not hold up super well, and I'm kind of glad they changed it, if I'm being honest. Especially now that seeing all the balancing and everything that went into the overall system in 1.0 here, it is fun to actually use. But if you don't enjoy the tactical system, you do actually have a bunch of options straight out of the gate in terms of how you would like to play, because not only are there a variety of different methods to use as a control scheme, that being tactical, hybrid, or focused, which turns on or activates a bunch of modes by default to kind of give you a particular experience in mind, tactical being full tactical, obviously. But, having to pause, give people directions, things like that. You can turn on some autonomous AI for your companions, but for the most part, you do it all. Whereas focused, most of the stuff happens automatically, and it's a much more basic system if you want to wrap your head around it. But even beyond those profiles, you also have a bunch of other options difficulty-wise, including the ability to just straight up turn an invincibility mode on, enabling or disabling friendly fire, determining how much damage both you and the enemies do, that kind of thing. So regardless of how you feel about the tactical combat, there is plenty of modes there to help you get through the game if you're just more concerned about the narrative side of things. Character creation. This is actually more or less what was available in the early access period, and I covered it in the previous update, so not too much more to report here. It is primarily cosmetic. There's a handful of options, and you can certainly make a better character than was initially available, but I am still disappointed that there is apparently not going to be any beard options, but it is what it is, I guess. Also in character creation, however, you do pick your character profile. This is important because it's where your character is going to start skill-wise. There are a bunch of different skill trees, and you can pick an initial profile which gives you a good leg up on particular playstyles, or you can go with a free form thing where you choose the abilities yourself. Then you'll pick attributes. There are 6 of them. They are, for the most part, going to synergize with what type of damage you are doing. If you're using big two-handed stuff, you probably want strength. If you're using one-handed stuff or dual wielding, you're going to want agility. Stuff like that. So, the kind of weapons you want to use are going to be the stats you want to use. They max out at 20, and you can only put in 8 at the beginning of the game. Once you've done that, however, you are off to the races, and story-wise, if you're unaware, Greedfall: The Dying World is actually a prequel to the original game. It takes place a couple of years before it, actually. To that end, if you know what happens in Greedfall, you do kind of know where at least some of this is going to go, because those events happen later, of course, and yet it still offers them plenty of background to expand upon things, flesh out the world and the setting, which is, I would argue, the single most interesting thing about Greedfall. So there is that. However, initially it's a bit of a reverse situation from the first game. In the first game, you are a member of the Desardet family of the Merchants Congregation that are going to the recently discovered Isle of Tir-Fridi, as the natives there have a connection with the land that everyone believes can help the mainland deal with the Malachor plague that has been going around for years at that point. In Greedfall the Dying World, however, we play the opposite. We are a member of one of the tribes that live on the Isle of Tir-Fridi, who is actually sort of initiated as a tribal shaman, so to speak. They call it like a Donigad. But right as this happens, you get attacked and kidnapped, basically, because as the events of Greedfall would have told you, they are experimenting on the tribals in an effort to work up cures and stuff for the Malachor, and simultaneously explore the incredibly unique connection the islanders have with the island. And so you are the target of some of these experiments and the like, except they never quite get that far because you are actually freed from prison by interested parties, and your journey is, of course, to initially escape, and then that sort of comes around to the wider narrative about things like the Malachor plague and a villain that shows up in this game specifically. That's an interesting enough premise, and we'll see how the story pans out. I haven't seen all of it myself, but there's some potential there to do some particularly interesting things. Some of this is available via the early access period already, but I'm excited to see if they can follow up on it, as the narrative and the setting of Greedfall 1 was the best stuff, and I'm hoping they continue that here. Along that journey, you are, in I would say typical BioWare fashion, or BioWare type RPGs fashion, you are going to be picking up a bunch of companions that will have their own stories, can be romanced, and will play an integral role in the narrative that they are telling. And as such, we're going to need a base item, not there in the review version. However, in the early access version, I know that there's a ship called the Constanza that you'll eventually get access to, and it'll serve as your base of operations as you do all of those things, talk to all those companions, do their quests, etc., etc. And I'll spend more time in the actual review talking about them, but both your character as well as the companions you'll be picking up along the way are all naturally going to have some classic RPG progression. If you've played any of Spider's games, this will feel very familiar to you. Really, the tactical element is what's new. Progression-wise, it's really not that much different at all. Every level you'll get an attribute point, every other level you get an attribute and a skill point, and then every few levels you also get a talent point, which allows you to put into things like craftsmanship, mechanism, survival, which helps you with like certain checks out in the world. Then there's also, as the craftsmanship would apply, crafting systems that can allow you to either make or upgrade gear. So there's gear you can find, but you can also upgrade it as well, adjusting parts of it both visually and mechanically speaking to make it more suiting to what you are trying to do for it. And so all of those things kind of constitute a lot of the progression that we're going to wind up being familiar with, which again is a lot of what Spiders has done in previous games. But when it comes to actually putting that stuff to use is where I think things get interesting, because it's clear they've been trying to expand upon some of the core mechanisms and gameplay within Greedfall 1. Straight away, they've already expanded use of things like stealth. So stealth in the original title was very limited. You would use it very sparingly in a couple of situations. And here, just straight out of the gate, they make much more use of it, with stealth being a more viable option, like around combat encounters and ways of getting to different quest solutions, things like that, sneaking into camps, finding the things you're looking for without necessarily either fighting your way in or bluffing your way in with stuff like diplomacy, etc. And so just straight away, with the addition of stealth mechanics that you can actually use more, they, I believe, expanded the disguise system as well, but I haven't seen too much of that. The original via stealth really also allowed you to disguise yourself potentially. They're doing more of that here. So before you even start talking about combat, and especially when you start talking about like running around and questing and stuff in larger, more densely populated areas with more going on, you find yourself in a position where it looks like what they mostly did is try to take the stuff that you saw in Greedfall and then expand upon it to give you more options and play styles before you even get to combat. But combat is, as you would expect, the biggest change here by far, because they have just changed the system entirely. The original game had a pause system technically where you could activate abilities, but the vast majority of it was this action-oriented system that people got really attached to. But again, after playing it relatively recently, combat in that game got stale pretty fast because you would basically just spam the same attack at enemies. And having done that, I can see why they made the changes that they did, but going from action to tactical is always going to be a situation that draws some attention, let's say. and any change really isn't going to be universally enjoyed. But I'm happy to say that at least coming from the early access period where this combat system was very, very rough, seeing it in the 1.0 version, it is improved, and I'm happy to see that. In particular, a lot of the numbers make more sense, the changes they made to the armor and magical deflection systems are helpful. So essentially, when you start combat, you have various armor and shielding via your magical deflection. This does not completely mitigate the damage you take, but it will reduce it. And in order to deal serious damage, you want to get through some of that shielding, which is where a lot of different abilities that are designed to break and attack those shields and get through their potentially magically charged versions via your magical deflection is kind of the name of the game. Now with that, magical attacks, if you want to play a character that uses magic in some way, will bypass that shielding altogether unless it has that magical deflection attached to it. And understanding some of those primary forms of damage mitigation on top of using skills and tactics to, of course, force enemies into situations that you are most likely to win is going to be the name of the game, provided you don't just want to turn on invincible mode and tackle it that way, which is certainly an option. Now, what tends to happen with a lot of these systems is they start out decently challenging, but once you get some progress under your belt and more options, you start to just dominate combat and it becomes particularly easy. So we'll see if over the course of the game it manages to retain some actual tactical difficulty, I suppose, as I am playing it on full tactical myself here. But without deep diving the system, the main thing I want to get across in this video is that the release version does play a lot better than the early access version has. And I think for the sake of a first impressions, that's about where I want to start wrapping up this video, actually. If I had to sum it up really succinctly, I would say that the release version of this game is better than I was expecting, all things considered. The stuff going on with Nacon I think really sucks for Spiders as a developer. I've been a fan of their work and the stuff they've done in the past, and I hope over the course of my time with this game that the quality remains high, and while, can't do much about the situation with Nacon, I do hope that the game they put out is in a really great state, especially given the sense that they may or may not get to support it post-launch, and we'll simply have to see what happens there. Now, it'll be a little longer before I get the full review done. Unfortunately, I've been a little bit busy, so I haven't been able to put as much time into this pre-release as I would have liked, but it shouldn't be insanely long, and hopefully I'll have that review up for you guys relatively soon. But as mentioned, it's been better than I expected so far, and it's a shame that the thing with Nacon is going to cast a shadow over this game's release. But that is where we're going to wrap it up for today. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, hang around for the review, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.